Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and welcome to day 24 of the Cracklathon, where I am doing one crackle veneer every day for an entire month. So today we're going to be using a heat gun again to create a different crackle, and today I'm going to be using some gold Polymer that's been rolled out to 2 millimeters thick, which is on my thickest setting. Now, this one has some roller marks on it. Hopefully you can pick that up on the camera. There, you should be able to see there. And I don't really want that. Now, the way you get rid of that is you just take a piece of plain printing paper and you just give it a very quick burnish. Go perpendicular to those roller marks. Try not to go parallel to them. Perpendicular is best. And that will get rid of them. Okay, so now you're going to need a heat gun. A hairdryer will not suffice for this. It has to be a heat gun. So this is the brand of heat gun I am using. And if you can see here, I've got on the hottest setting. I'm also going to have it on the highest wind speed. And before I use it, I like to warm it up for about 5 seconds beforehand, and then I'll hit the clay with it. And that is generally all you need. So you can see it's a very, very quick process to get it done, especially if you let it warm up for 5 seconds before hitting it, because the problem is if you switch it on straight away, it takes about 5 seconds to warm up to its proper heat. So you'll find that when you're going over this section, it is not hot enough, and by the time you get to this section, it is quite hot. So you're going to get very uneven crackles, and you're going to find some areas are not cured properly, whereas other areas are cured too much. So that is a definite must when you're using a heat gun. Okay, now we're going to pick this up, and we are going to start cracking it. And I actually go run that through my pasta machine on the thickest setting just to get it started. And there you can see it starting to crack there. And I don't want to run it through anymore. That was the thickest setting, so I'm not making it any thinner really. I'm just manipulating it a little bit by running it through the pasta machine. I wouldn't run it down any thinner settings because we're not going to be able to keep our nice deep cracks. Because if you run it through the pasta machine, what happens is the pasta machine will flatten it out rather than stretching it and keeping it basically the same thickness. I've got a little bit on the back here that I need to get rid of there. And we need those cracks to be deep and not flat, because when we're antiquing, the deeper they are, the easier it is to do the antiquing. Give it a quick stretch, and I'll do that from the opposite direction as well to get those kind of square cracks rather than the striped cracks. You can see a beautiful crackle. And now the areas where you've got larger cracks versus smaller cracks, that is because the clay was cured more. So experiment around and have some fun with it, but you're basically just playing with a few seconds here and there. So before starting with proper polymer clay, I would recommend taking your scrap that you have no interest in using other than for maybe backings or bead cores, just the really ugly stuff, the worst bits, and playing around with this crackle effect beforehand, because it does take a little bit of practice to get. It took me probably about 10 tries before I managed to get something that didn't fall apart in my hands, because you think it needs to be longer than it actually needs to be. Okay, now I just am stretching this out so that it's in a position where I can antique it correctly. So what I do is I stick it down to the tile and grab the other end, stretch, and then stick that down, like so. There we go. And now I'm going to be using some black and white paint. This is the brand that I am using, and it's a really good brand. I quite like this brand. So just giving them both a shake. and I am using white as well. Pour that out onto the tile. Don't need too much. And you can use a paintbrush if you want, but I prefer to use my finger, because I think it just gives me some more control. Okay, and now it is going to dry on the surface of the clay. That is fine. And if you want to wait until your clay is completely baked, that is also fine. But just go over it a few times and rub, because you want to get it into those cracks. There. And the reason I'm not using a paintbrush is because I'll get my two colours cross contaminated, and I don't really want that. Just brush it over the surface. And now another thing that you could try instead of using paint is you can use liquid clay, believe it or not. But if you're going to use liquid clay, I would recommend having already cut out your pendant and everything, because it can be a little tricky to work with otherwise. Okay, and I'm just going to continue manipulating the paint and painting it over the surface. Okay, and here is how it looks at the moment. So now grab a wet wipe and just skim over the surface to remove that paint. And that can take a bit of time, especially since most of it has dried by now. I basically skim most of it off, and then I'll bring a tissue over, a dry cloth, and we'll clean it up. But I have to get off most of that dry paint first. Okay, so I'd say around this point I could bring over a tissue and start drying it. This is a bit of a lengthy process, and you have to be careful because the clay is still raw, and so if you're not too careful with it, you could end up breaking. So at this point, grab your wet wipe, wet a spot, scrub it, then bring over your tissue and dry off any paint that is sitting on the surface, like so. And just repeat until you have a clean crackle, or it's at the point where you're happy with it. Okay, and here is how it has ended up looking. So it looks quite nice, but I do want to give a little bit more interest to the surface. So I'm going to use an alcohol ink dabber that I got from Linda's Art Spot, and some pinata inks that I got from her as well. And just open those up quickly off to the side. And this is optional, you don't have to do this. You could do this technique can be used with any clay you want, so you could maybe use a Skinner blend, you could use canes, anything you want. Just going to dab that over the surface, and it might eliminate the white, but that's alright, because it probably will get down into the cracks, but that's fine. Kind of has an interesting fall appearance to it. There we go, and I'm just going to pop a bit more yellow on. Okay. and I'm not sure the white really highlights it enough for my liking, so I think I'm going to probably add the black paint on. And you can do that at this point, it will work perfectly fine. Just grab a piece of plain printing paper, rub it over the surface, and that will remove excess ink so that it is pretty dry. And we can always add a little bit of ink later on if we need to. But I do like that black, it stands out really nicely, whereas the white kind of looks like a dull, not really noticeable in the background thing. So I'll just take that and rub that over the surface. And so it's fine to kind of change your mind and think through things and try things and undo them as you go. It's actually something that I really like to do, and a lot of the time that's where my best ideas come from. So those of you who are wondering where I get my ideas, just have fun, play around. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, but more often than not I find it does. Just don't do anything impulsively, think through what you're doing beforehand. It doesn't hurt to do that. But most of the time it turns out really nicely. And I just have to make sure that I get that black. Okay, just need to get a new one. Okay, and now it's a little dull at the moment, so just make sure that you get rid of all of that. And then I'll grab a tissue. And this will just dry it up a bit. And it's got this really nice autumn feel to it. Okay, and if you're having a lot of trouble getting rid of that the paint, you can use some isopropyl alcohol. Now keep in mind this is going to remove the inks and we're going to have to reapply them. But sometimes it is necessary to get rid of that dark shadow, I call it, that hangs over the piece. And you'll still keep some of that ink, it will still be there, it just won't be as strong. We'll just have slightly dyed it, and I actually quite like it like that. So I'm not going to reapply any of the ink, I'm just going to make sure that I get rid of as much of that paint stains as possible. Okay, let me clean up the tile and I can show you up close. And there we go, that is how it looks. So I'm quite happy with how that appears. Now you do want to let that paint dry completely before you put it in the oven, otherwise you're going to get a lot of bubbles coming through the cracks, so just make sure that that dries before you attempt to bake it. Don't use a hairdryer or a heat gun on it because that can also encourage the bubbles. Just let it completely air dry naturally, and after it's done that I generally will go over and give it one final clean up to get rid of any little paint smears that might be hanging around. But for the most part that is basically it. So let me just bring you up close so you can see that. There you go. So I hope that you enjoyed that tutorial. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and remember this technique is fairly versatile. You can mess around with the clay that you start with, you can mess around with the paint that you use, you can even use liquid clay if you want to. So play around with it and have some fun. And remember, there are a bunch of tutorials that have already been done, about 24 including this one, so be sure to go back and check on those because there are an absolute ton of them covering many different techniques, so go back and have a look at those. And if you like this crackle and it is your favourite so far, be sure to go and check out my group Jessama Tutorials Polymer Clay Community and vote for this on the poll that will be posted at the end of the month, so that you will be able to vote for your favourite crackle. And then the most popular crackle will get a project tutorial done next month, so be sure to vote for whichever one is your favourite crackle. And as always, I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.